part of the authentic spiritual impulse, usually there's two components to it. One is a sort of emotional component, which is basically, I want to feel better. Will believing in God help me feel better? Will having an enlightenment experience make me feel better? I just want to feel better. Life's a tough thing. Life's a rocky road, man, even for the most fortunate, much less those who are terribly, catastrophically unfortunate. It's a challenge for anybody and everybody, Just ask Jesus. So how'd that enlightened thing go for you? Removed all the suffering, huh? You know what I mean? And yet that's a perfectly relevant impulse that we all have. We would all rather have more pleasure than less, more love than less, more peace than less, at least to a certain extent. And so that's part of the motivation, some version of the motivation to mitigate suffering as much as possible. There's another part of the motivation, too, that comes out of what I was just talking about. However it comes upon you for way before the modern era, for as long as there's been human beings, there's been that self-consciousness has that ability to look around and wonder, what's it all about? Or you become conscious enough to know how crazy we and you are. Right? Like we human beings, we can do some amazing things. We've come up with some pretty impressive sort of advanced culture, but you scratch beneath the surface, and we're just that far from insanity. Right? We have a real problem getting along with each other. Sometimes we have even a bigger problem getting along with ourselves. Right? That's, I think, where some of the most vicious wars are fought, is within one's own personal psychology. We are not often, sometimes we are, but we're not often taught how to treat ourselves well. What it even means to treat yourself well. To treat yourself as if you were someone that you actually cared about, or liked, or saw value in. We're taught, be this way, be that way, stop doing that, do this. We're taught all that stuff. But we're not really taught of, gee, maybe you could treat yourself a little nicer. Maybe you could start there. What would that even mean, to be kinder to oneself? And I don't mean the kind of self-indulgent kindness, right? I don't mean that kind of kindness where you're not acknowledging your own confusion or your own capacity for inflicting suffering on others. There's a way you can attempt to be kind to yourself that becomes almost entirely narcissistic. But nonetheless, I think, wouldn't it be nice if we all were taught just the very idea that, gee, it might be nice that if you could actually be kind to yourself. Life's a pretty tough trip. Maybe you should get off your back a little bit now and then, It's not easy. But the other part of that, of the spiritual impulse, as I was saying, comes out of some capacity to look more at life as a whole, say like the Buddha did, and he noticed, wow, an integral part of life is suffering. Not that all of life is suffering, but an integral part. It seems like nobody gets out of that. You may be rich, you may be poor, you may be fortunate, unfortunate, talented, untalented. All these things you may or may not have, but the one thing you are going to have is some sorrow in your life. That's what he noticed, right? He looked around and he thought, I wonder if we can do anything about that, right? A kind of an acknowledgement of a kind of universal truth of human experience, right? And so I think that's part of the other spiritual impulse too that arises out of a willingness and a courage to acknowledge certain parts of the human experience that are absolutely universal, you know? When I was in my late teens, I remember I started to sort of scratch my head and wonder, gee, I would really like a life that was a bit more sane than the normal adult life that I see going on all around me. You know what I mean? And I grew up in a pretty good home, and I was loved and I was cared for, and I was very clear that I had parents that liked me, and I had the thing that I think a lot of people would like to have. And even then, could see like, gee, there's just a lot of adults can be nutty. And having become one, I really found that was true. Right? We can be really confused and manipulative and, you know, all the rest. You don't need me to tell you about it. And you thought, gee, I wonder if I could somehow mitigate that to whatever extent possible so that my life might contribute a bit more sanity than it does insanity, a bit more peace than it does conflict. I wonder what that would entail. It seemed to become a very important thing to me as I approached my 20s many years ago. And it became one of the impetus for my spiritual search. Is there a way to be a bit less conflicted than it seems like what I see all around me? So I think from time immemorial, these two motivators of our own spiritual quest, you know, the motivation just not to suffer so much or maybe to feel much better, and the motivation of an acknowledgement of the fact that your life has impact and that you actually care about what that impact is on life all around you and what you want your life to be contributing, right? Those two things, I think, are some of the most sort of universal motivations. But everybody has their own unique way that those motivations live in them.